Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a long, slow journey across the vast, undulating steppes of Eurasia, a landscape so immense it makes your backyard look like a postage stamp. Imagine yourself there, astride a sturdy, shaggy pony, the wind whipping at your face, the endless horizon stretching out before you. You're not a conquering warrior. No, nothing so exciting. Just a humble messenger. A cog in the most incredible communication network the world had ever seen. A system that linked empires and delivered everything from official decrees to, well, probably some very important takeout orders. And let me tell you, you probably won't survive this epic tale without falling fast asleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's if you're listening. Drop a comment below with where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Always curious to see where these sleepy vibes reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the edge of the known world, or at least what was the known world to the nomadic tribes of Central Asia. The year is somewhere in the early 13th century. A force of nature named Genghis Khan is busy forging an empire of unprecedented scale. But how do you hold together something so enormous? How do you send orders, receive intelligence, and keep tabs on armies spread across thousands of miles, from the freezing taiga to the searing deserts? Well, you don't just shout really loud. You build a cosmic network, a system so ingenious, so efficient, that it would make modern-day logistics experts weep with envy. Historians still argue whether the YAM system was primarily for military control or administrative cohesion, but its sheer ambition is undeniable. Think about it. You've got these fierce mounted warriors sweeping across continents, conquering vast swaths of territory. They're good at fighting, sure, but what about the boring stuff? Paperwork, the communication? This wasn't just about sending a few letters. It was about knitting together an empire, about ensuring that the Khan's will from Karakoram to Kiev was known and acted upon with remarkable speed. It's like building the internet, but instead of fiber optic cables, you've got thousands of galloping horses and hardened riders. You can almost feel the ground tremble beneath your feet as another rider gallops past. A blur of fur and dust, carrying a message that could decide the fate of nations. You might even catch a whiff of horse sweat and leather. A scent that probably defined daily life for millions under Mongol rule. It was a network designed not just for communication, but for control, for stability, for projecting the Khan's omnipotence across an entire continent. A quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that the Mongols were so meticulous with their postal routes, they sometimes bypassed fertile agricultural lands just to ensure the most direct line, prioritizing speed over local resources for the YAM itself. The sheer scale and forward-thinking nature of this system, especially for an empire built on conquest, is genuinely mind-boggling. It tells you that Genghis Khan, despite his reputation as a ruthless warrior, was also a master of organization, an ancient visionary who understood that an empire, however vast, is only as strong as its ability to communicate with itself. So, you have this burgeoning empire, expanding faster than a spilled cup of coffee on a fresh carpet, and it desperately needs a way to talk to itself. This brings us to the birth of the YAM, the Mongol Postal System, which wasn't just a convenient addition. It was the circulatory system of the entire conquest machine. Before the Mongols, communication in such vast territories was a slow, arduous affair, relying on individual travelers or small, uncoordinated relays. Imagine sending a text message, but it takes 3 months to arrive, and your phone battery died on day 1. That was the reality. Genghis Khan, ever the pragmatist, understood that information was power, and fast information was unstoppable power. He wasn't inventing the wheel exactly. Other empires had used messenger systems like the Persian Angarion or the Roman cursus publicus, but the Mongols took the concept, slapped it on a horse, and injected it with a terrifying dose of efficiency and scale. It was less about casual correspondence and more about military might and administrative control. The initial purpose was brutally practical, to ensure that the Khan's commands reached his generals quickly and accurately, and that reports from the front lines and newly conquered territories flowed back just as swiftly. This meant coordinating troop movements, managing supplies, and suppressing rebellions before they could even properly ignite. You can almost feel the urgent energy of its creation. It wasn't built overnight, of course. It evolved probably out of the existing nomadic practice of using fast riders to scout and communicate. But under Genghis and later under his son Gadai, it became systematized, formalized, and incredibly well-resourced. Imagine the scene. Khan, probably sitting in a large felt yurt, strategizing with his top generals, realizing the sheer logistical nightmare of controlling land stretching from the Pacific to Eastern Europe. We need eyes and ears everywhere. You can almost hear him saying, and they need to move like the wind. And thus, the yam began to take shape. The scale of this undertaking was staggering. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation was truly for imperial governance, or if it was more about facilitating trade and commerce. But its strategic military advantage is undeniable. A quirky tidbit: the Chinese character for post-Jan. Zan is actually derived from the Mongol word for a relay station, reflecting the profound impact the yam had on later Chinese communication systems. This wasn't just a few isolated outposts. It was a vast network of thousands of stations, manned by tens of thousands of people, stocked with hundreds of thousands of horses. It was the original express delivery service, except instead of delivering your new phone, they were delivering news of a new conquest or orders for a strategic retreat. The very foundation of the Mongol Empire, its ability to expand and hold. Its vast territories was inextricably linked to the rapid flow of information enabled by the yam. It was a system built for speed, resilience, and absolute loyalty to the Khan's authority, transforming the wild, untamed steppes into a perfectly calibrated machine of imperial communication. Now imagine yourself as one of these crucial cogs. In the magnificent galloping machine, a yam rider's life, you're not a pampered official, you're a workhorse, quite literally. Your existence is defined by the saddle, the open steppe, and the relentless pursuit of speed. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart, or for anyone who enjoyed regular showers and a stable bedtime. Your home was the road, your companions often just the wind and the rhythmic thud of hooves. Picture it. You wake before dawn, or perhaps you haven't really slept, having just arrived at a yam station, exhausted but needing to push on. The air is crisp, maybe even biting, and the silence of the vast landscape is broken only by the snorting of horses and the quiet murmurs of the station attendants. You quickly grab a fresh horse already saddled, perhaps a bowl of kumis-fermented mare's milk, a potent, slightly alcoholic, and very traditional Mongol drink, which probably tasted well memorable at that hour. There's no time for lattes here. Your saddlebag holds only essentials: a little dried meat, some parched grain, maybe a flint and steel. And of course, the precious message, often sealed and sometimes carried in a special pouch to protect it from the elements. Your journey isn't just a ride. It's a race against time, against the elements, against your own exhaustion. You might ride for hours, hunched against a driving rain, or squinting through a blizzard, or battling the oppressive heat of the summer sun. The monotony of the landscape could be mind-numbing, stretching to the horizon with only the occasional herd of wild horses or a distant cluster of yurts to break the endless expanse. But you can't afford to be complacent. A misstep, a wrong turn, or a faltering horse could delay a vital message. Your personal comfort is utterly irrelevant. You are a human relay baton, and the message is the ultimate priority. A quirky tidbit: Marco Polo, who traveled extensively through the Mongol Empire, was utterly astonished by the efficiency of the yam, describing it in great detail in his writings, sometimes exaggerating, but always emphasizing its sheer brilliance. He noted that even in the most desolate areas, the stations were well maintained. Historians still argue whether the Ogons were primarily self-sufficient through local levies or if they received centralized provisions from the Mongol administration. But their continuous operation was non-negotiable. It wasn't just about fast horses. It was about the infrastructure that supported them, the dedicated personnel, and the relentless focus on getting the message through. You could be riding through a desolate, frozen landscape, feeling completely alone, but knowing that just ahead, another Ogun waited, a beacon of efficiency in the vast emptiness, ready to propel you further on your urgent journey. So, you've arrived exhausted at an agon. But it wasn't just a place to swap horses and maybe grab a quick swig of water. These stations, especially the larger ones, offered surprisingly good amenities, turning them into a kind of ancient room service experience for the privileged few. You weren't exactly checking into a 5-star hotel, but after days on the dusty trail, a warm yurt and a hot meal probably felt like paradise. Imagine stepping off your horse, your muscles aching, your body stiff from hours in the saddle. Instead of just a lean-to, you'd find a cluster of yurts, food, and comforts awaiting you. These wasn't just any yurts. These were purpose-built for the yam system. They were sturdy, felt-covered dwellings, surprisingly spacious and warm, especially in the harsh Mongol winters. Inside, you might find a simple but comfortable bed, perhaps some furs to ward off the chill, and most importantly, a fire crackling. In the central hearth, the smoke hole at the top, a common feature of nomadic yurts, would let out the smoke while allowing in a peek of the vast, starry sky. But the real luxury, especially for a ravenous rider, was the food. The yam stations were stocked with provisions for both the human travelers and their equine companions. You could expect hearty, sustaining meals, often featuring boiled meat, usually mutton, and perhaps some grains or fermented dairy products. It was simple fare, but nutritious, and designed to replenish energy quickly, you wouldn't find a chef asking for your dietary preferences, but you'd get a hot, satisfying meal, which was a true blessing in the desolate expanse of the steppe. This was a crucial part of the system. Well-fed and rested riders could maintain their blistering pace. A quirky tidbit: some sources suggest that the larger yam stations even maintained small breweries to provide fermented beverages for the riders and staff, though this was likely more about sustaining morale and tradition than offering a happy hour. Historians still argue whether the yam stations primarily served just the official messengers and military, or if they were also open, perhaps for a fee, to private merchants and ordinary travelers, thereby also boosting trade. The reality was likely a mix, with priority always given to imperial business. The idea that these remote outposts offered a degree of comfort is a fascinating counterpoint to the image of the Mongols as purely destructive forces. It shows a sophisticated understanding of logistics and human needs, recognizing that even the toughest riders needed a brief respite, a warm belly, and a comfortable spot to rest before facing the endless road again. You might even hear the quiet, rhythmic breathing of other tired riders. Sharing the same temporary haven, each a silent witness to the incredible engine of the Mongol Empire. Now, while the horses and yurts were the muscle and bone of the yam, the real magic that granted you access to its unparalleled speed and service was a very specific, very shiny piece of metal, the secrets of the pesa. This wasn't some kind of ancient credit card you swiped. It was a physical medallion, a tablet, usually made of bronze, silver, or for the highest-ranking envoys, solid gold. And if you carried one of these, you were royalty on the Yam. Imagine pulling into an ogden, dusty and travel-worn, but then you produce this gleaming tablet from your pouch. The station manager's demeanor immediately shifts. This wasn't just a sign of authority, it was the ultimate VIP pass. The Pesa pronounced Paisa literally translated to tablet or sign, and it functioned as an imperial passport and a warrant for resources. Depending on its material and the number of lions or other symbols embossed on it, it indicated your rank and the level of service you were entitled to. A golden Pesa meant you were carrying a message directly from the Great Khan himself, and every resource of the Yam network was at your disposal without question or delay. These tablets weren't just for show. They were inscribed with a decree, often in Fagspa script, a script specially created for the Mongol Empire, stating that the bearer was on imperial business and everyone, from local chieftains to Yam station managers, was to provide them with horses, provisions, and assistance without fail. To deny a Pesa bearer was to defy the Great Khan, and that was a very, very bad idea, usually punishable by death. It was a brilliant, simple, and utterly effective system for decentralizing authority while maintaining absolute control. You didn't need complicated paperwork or multiple seals. The Pesa said it all. It was the ultimate fast pass through the empire. A quirky tidbit. Sometimes, these Pesa tablets also indicated the number of horses the bearer could demand at each station, sometimes even specifying up to 20 horses for special envoys. Imagine pulling up and needing 20 fresh horses for your entourage. Historians still argue whether the Pesa system was an entirely Mongol invention or if it was adapted from earlier Turkic or Chinese practices, but it's widespread and consistent. Implementation across the vast Mongol Empire was unprecedented. You hold this weighty symbol in your hand, feeling its cold metal against your palm, and you understand the immense power it represents. It's not your personal power, of course, but a borrowed authority, a direct conduit to the might of the Khan, allowing you to slice through the vastness of the empire with unparalleled speed and privilege. It was truly the key that unlocked the incredible efficiency of the Mongol Postal System. With your Pesa flashing like a beacon of imperial authority, you now experience the sheer marvel of the Mongol Yam. Speed beyond imagination. For centuries, before and after, travel and communication were agonizingly slow. News from one end of a kingdom to another could take weeks, even months. But under the Mongols, information zipped across continents at a pace that was genuinely revolutionary. Imagine trying to send a message from, say, present-day Hanoi to London in the 13th century. It would be an undertaking so vast and perilous, it would likely never arrive. But with the Yam, official dispatches could travel an astounding 200 to 300 kilometers. That's about 125 to 186 miles in a single day. Sometimes even more for urgent communications. To put that into perspective, that's faster than any organized postal system in Europe for hundreds of years. Right up until the advent of the railway system in the 19th century, you're not just breaking records, you're smashing them into tiny, anachronistic pieces. This incredible velocity wasn't just due to fast horses. Though the Mongols were renowned for their horsemanship and their hardy ponies, it was the system itself, the perfectly spaced ogons, the constant supply of fresh mounts, the dedicated riders who pushed themselves to the limit, and the Pesa that cleared any obstacles. There were no bureaucratic delays, no need to haggle for fresh horses or supplies. The path was cleared, the resources were mandated, and the message was paramount. You literally become a blur on the horizon, leaving behind a trail of dust and astonishment in your wake. It must have been truly baffling for local populations to witness this seemingly ceaseless, high-speed flow of riders linking distant lands with invisible threads of information. Asterisk, a quirky tidbit. Marco Polo. After observing the yam, famously claimed that fish caught in the Indian Ocean could be delivered fresh to the Great Khan's table in Karakoram, a journey of thousands of miles. Within 2 days, while this is almost certainly an exaggeration, fish would definitely not be fresh after 2 days across that distance without modern refrigeration. It illustrates the awe and amazement inspired by the yam's legendary speed. Historians still argue whether the highest reported speeds were typical for all traffic or reserved only for the most critical imperial messages. But there's no doubt that the yam fundamentally redefined what was possible in long-distance communication. As you gallop on, the landscape blurring past, you feel the raw power of an empire that could compress space and time, all for the sake of its boundless ambition. Such incredible speed, however, didn't come without immense logistical challenges. Imagine trying to maintain a complex network spanning an entire continent, without satellites, without asphalt roads, and with sometimes hostile populations. This brings us to the monumental task of keeping the lines open. The Mongol Empire had to overcome formidable obstacles, from natural barriers to the sheer demands of supplying thousands of animals and people. Firstly, horses. The yam required an astronomical number of horses. At any given time, hundreds of thousands of horses were spread across the network, needing to be fed, watered, and rested. This meant that each ogun had to have vast grazing, lands, and access to reliable water sources. In arid regions, this was a constant struggle. You can almost hear the endless whinnying and snorting of the equine workforce, the true unsung heroes of the yam. They weren't just animals, they were the engines of the empire. Secondly, personnel. Thousands of people were needed to run the yam: station managers, stable hands, cooks, guards, and of course, the riders themselves. These individuals, whether conscripted or volunteers, had to be organized, provisioned, and managed across a truly immense territory. Imagine the constant training and recruitment needed to keep the system fully staffed, especially with the high turnover that such a demanding job would entail. It was a massive employment program disguised as a postal service. Thirdly, security. A system so vital to the empire was, of course, a tempting target for bandits or rebellious factions. The yam routes and stations had to be protected. While not every ogun was a fortress, many were fortified, and riders often traveled in small groups or were well armed. It was a perilous journey, not just because of exhaustion, but because danger lurked in the vast emptiness. You might see the glint of a distant sentinel watching over a lonely stretch of the route, ensuring the Khan's messages kept flowing. A quirky tidbit to ensure adequate horse supplies. Local populations along the yam routes were often compelled to contribute. Horses and labor, a heavy burden that sometimes led to resentment and local revolts. Historians still argue whether the imposition of the yam system, despite its benefits for imperial control, was ultimately a net positive or a significant strain on the conquered populations. Regardless, the Mongols' ability to overcome these challenges, to effectively terraform vast stretches of Asia into a functioning communication network, speaks volumes about their organizational prowess. It wasn't just about conquering land. It was about conquering logistics, and that, perhaps, was their greatest, most enduring, and boringly brilliant achievement. The yam wasn't just a conduit for urgent military dispatches or royal decrees. It was also a bustling artery for a surprising array of goods and information, demonstrating its multifaceted importance to the empire. This section explores how the system went from news to noodles, transporting much more than just official paperwork. While high-priority military messages always took precedence, The yam also facilitated the movement of a diverse range of items. Imagine a bustling medieval highway, but instead of slow wagons, everything is moving at a gallop. For instance, tax revenues collected from conquered territories would be transported back to the Mongol capital. This wasn't just gold and silver. It could also include valuable furs, silks, and other luxury goods demanded as tribute. You can picture heavily guarded riders, their horses laden with precious cargo, hurrying along the well-trodden yam routes. Beyond official imperial business, the yam also played a crucial role in trade and commerce. While not explicitly a commercial postal service in the modern sense, its existence created a stable, relatively secure, and remarkably fast network across Eurasia. This encouraged merchants to travel along the yam routes, knowing there were stations providing food, water, and security. They might not have been able to demand fresh horses with a pesa, but they benefited from the infrastructure. This helped to integrate the vast Mongol Empire economically, allowing goods and even new ideas to flow from east to west and back again. Imagine a caravan of camels arriving at a yam station, trading stories, and maybe even some exotic spices. With the resident jamshis and riders, a quirkier tidbit. There's evidence to suggest that the yam was occasionally used to transport perishable goods for the imperial court, like exotic fruits, or even, as Marco Polo exaggerated, fresh fish. While the fresh fish claim might be a stretch without modern refrigeration, it highlights the system's reputation for incredible speed. More practically, it transported technical knowledge and cultural innovations. For example, Chinese engineers. Doctors and artisans were sometimes moved across the empire to work on various projects or share their skills. Historians still argue whether the yam contributed more to military conquest or to the eventual cultural exchange and integration across Eurasia, but it undeniably served as a vital channel for both. It was, in essence, the very first high-speed, pan-continental delivery service, moving everything from the fate of nations to the ingredients for a truly imperial feast. The remarkable efficiency and sheer scale of the yam didn't just serve the Mongol Empire. Its influence rippled outwards, leaving an undeniable mark on subsequent communication systems. This section delves into the yam's global influence, tracing how this ancient network shaped later postal services across continents. You see, what the Mongols built was a blueprint. Before them, nothing of comparable scale and consistency existed. When other powers rose and observed the incredible advantage the Mongols held due to their rapid communication, they took note. Perhaps the most direct influence can be seen in China. After the Yuan dynasty, the Mongol-led dynasty in China fell. The subsequent Ming dynasty largely adopted and refined the yam system. They maintained the vast network of postal stations, though perhaps with less emphasis on the raw breakneck speed and more on stable, administrative communication. This continuity shows how fundamentally effective the Mongol model was. It wasn't just a transient conquest tool. It was a foundational piece of infrastructure that endured. But the influence wasn't limited to China. As the Mongol Empire fragmented and new empires emerged from its ashes, the idea of a centralized state-run postal system designed for rapid communication and control persisted. You can see echoes of the yam in the Ottoman Empire's sophisticated messenger networks, and even in the nascent postal services that began to emerge in Europe centuries later. While European systems often started as private ventures or royal monopolies, the concept of strategically placed relay stations, fresh horses and official couriers on fixed routes owes a conceptual debt to the Mongol innovation. It was a clear demonstration of how a well-organized communication system could project power and consolidate authority over vast distances. A quirky tidbit. Some scholars suggest that the widespread use of paper money in the Mongol Empire, particularly in China, was also facilitated by the yam system, as it allowed for rapid and secure transportation of valuable financial instruments. Historians still argue whether the yam's legacy was more about its direct, technical influence on subsequent postal systems or its broader conceptual impact, demonstrating the strategic necessity of fast communication for any large state. As you reflect on this, you realize that the dust you imagined swirling behind your galloping horse wasn't just dirt. It was the residue of an idea, an innovation that would travel through time, shaping the very way future civilizations connected themselves. The Mongols, for all their destructive power, also built something truly constructive and enduring. While the yam was undeniably a marvel of efficiency and organization, like any powerful system, it also had a darker, more intrusive side. Section explores the shadowy yam, revealing how this impressive network could also be a tool for surveillance, control, and sometimes outright abuse. Asterisk, you see. A system that could move information so quickly and efficiently was also perfect for keeping tabs on a vast and often restive population. The yam riders and station managers weren't just postal workers. They were often the eyes and ears of the Khan. Imagine being a local chieftain in a newly conquered territory. Every rider who passed through your village, every interaction at the local ogon was potentially an observation reported back to the central authority. News of dissent, potential rebellions, or even just inefficient local governance could reach Karakoram with alarming speed. It was an early form of a panopticon, where the constant flow of information meant everyone felt watched, whether they were or not. Furthermore, the very demands of maintaining the yam could be a heavy burden on the local populace. While the system offered some benefits, such as increased trade and security on the routes, it also came with significant costs. Local communities were often conscripted to provide horses, fodder, and labor for the yam stations. This wasn't always a voluntary contribution. It was a compulsory tax, a forced contribution to the imperial machine. Imagine having your best horses taken for imperial use, or having to feed dozens of extra men and animals without adequate compensation. This could lead to resentment, hardship, and a feeling of being exploited by a distant, powerful authority. You can almost hear the grumbling from the villagers as another group of demanding riders thunders through. A quirky tidbit. Some historical accounts mention that yam riders, particularly those carrying peza, sometimes abused their privileges, demanding excessive provisions or forcing locals to provide services far beyond what was required. Historians still argue whether such abuses were widespread or isolated incidents, but they certainly illustrate the potential for power to corrupt, even within a meticulously organized system. The shadow cast by the yam was the implicit threat of the Khans. Swift reach, a reminder that the empire's power wasn't just in its armies, but also in its unparalleled ability to know and control. It was a dual-edged sword, bringing order and connection, but also the omnipresent gaze of imperial authority. Even centuries after its decline, the echoes of the Mongol yam resonate in surprising ways, demonstrating how foundational its principles were for communication. This section draws parallels, revealing the echoes in modern mail and how the ancient system laid groundwork for concepts we now take for granted. Consider your everyday postal service here in Vietnam, or indeed anywhere in the world. What are its core components? You have a network of fixed locations, post offices, a system for rapidly moving items between them, delivery routes, and a method for identifying priority or special services express mail tracking numbers. Sound familiar? It should. The fundamental design of the yam, a relay system with designated stations. Fresh resources and dedicated carriers is strikingly similar to the infrastructure of modern postal systems. While we've traded horses for trucks, trains, and planes, Pesa for barcodes and digital tracking, the underlying logic remains consistent. You can almost feel the historical continuity, a ghost of a galloping horse in the rumble of a mail truck. Think about the concept of express delivery. When you pay extra for a package to arrive overnight, you're essentially buying into the same principle that underpinned the yam speed at a premium. The Mongols developed this concept to an astonishing degree, prioritizing crucial messages above all else, ensuring their swift passage. They were the original guaranteed next-day delivery service, just with more dust and fewer uniforms. And remember how you envisioned the yam rider's life? The dedication of a modern postal worker, navigating all weathers and tirelessly delivering, often goes unsung. But it's a direct descendant of that ancient commitment to getting the message through. A quirky tidbit, the very idea of a postal road is a distinct, maintained route for communication rather than just general travel gained. Significant traction after the Mongol period. This emphasis on dedicated infrastructure for information flow was a crucial innovation. Historians still argue whether the yam should be considered a direct ancestor of modern postal services or merely a highly influential parallel development. But its impact on the idea of efficient state-managed communication is undeniable. So, the next time you drop a letter in a mailbox or track a package online, take a moment to appreciate that you're engaging with principles first perfected on the vast windswept plains of the Mongol Empire. The past, in this instance, is not so far away after all. For a system so focused on speed and efficiency across vast, often featureless landscapes, the Mongol yam required something truly indispensable: good maps. This brings us to the unsung heroes of the empire, the Mongol mapmakers. So you can't have a reliable relay system. If your riders are constantly getting lost or taking inefficient detours, imagine trying to establish thousands of postal stations across mountains, deserts, rivers, and steppes without any accurate geographical information. It would be a chaotic nightmare. The Mongols, being highly pragmatic, understood this implicitly. They were not just conquerors. They were meticulous record keepers and, crucially, diligent cartographers. As their armies advanced and new territories were incorporated into the empire, detailed surveys were conducted. These weren't necessarily the beautifully rendered artistic maps you see from European Renaissance cartographers. They were functional, practical, highly accurate for their purpose. These maps would detail the location of yam stations, the best routes between them, the availability of water sources, safe river crossings, and dangerous terrain. Also mark significant landmarks, potential hazards, and strategic points. Riders probably carried simplified versions, or perhaps committed vast stretches of their routes to memory. But the overall network was built on a foundation of meticulously gathered geographical data. It was like building a GPS system, but with pen, paper, and a lot of boots on the ground. You can almost see the dusty scrolls being unrolled in a yurt, showing the intricate lines connecting the farthest reaches of the empire. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe that the Mongols' cartographic expertise gained through the demands of the yam and military campaigns influenced later Chinese and even European mapmaking. The accuracy of their routes and their systematic approach to geographical information gathering was groundbreaking. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for such detailed mapmaking was solely for military and yam purposes, or if it also served broader administrative and economic goals for the empire. But its practical application and enabling. The yam is clear. Without these dedicated mapmakers, without their tireless work of surveying and documenting, the great cosmic network of the Mongol yam would have been little more than a theoretical concept. lost in the vast, uncharted wilderness. Their quiet, painstaking work ensured that the riders and the empire itself always knew where they were going. Nothing lasts forever, and even the most efficient and impressive systems eventually succumb to the relentless march of time and political upheaval. So too did the Mongol Yam, entering its period of decline, marking the fall of the Yam. Its gradual dissolution wasn't a sudden collapse, but rather a slow fragmentation. Mirroring the fate of the vast empire it served as the Mongol Empire grew, to its unprecedented size, it eventually became too vast, too unwieldy, to be governed effectively from a single center. The empire fractured into various successor states: the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, the Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty in China. While these new khanates often maintained their own internal postal systems that were still remarkably efficient, the grand, unified Pan-Eurasian Yam system, stretching from the Pacific to Eastern Europe, began to unravel. You can imagine the lines of communication fraying. It's like threads pulled from a once tight tapestry. The decline was hastened by several factors. Internal strife and civil wars within the Mongol successor states disrupted the flow of communication and made maintaining distant Yam stations increasingly difficult and dangerous. Resources that were once pooled for the common good of the unified empire were now diverted to localized conflicts. Furthermore, the economic burdens of maintaining such an extensive network, especially on local populations who were often compelled to provide resources, became unsustainable without the centralized power and overwhelming authority of the unified Great Khan. The enthusiasm and brutal efficiency that characterized its peak performance began to wane. A quirky tidbit: some later khanates, Ilkhanate in Persia, struggled to maintain the Yam with the same level of discipline as the unified empire, leading to reports of inefficiency and even corruption creeping into the system. Historians still argue whether the decline of the Yam contributed to the fragmentation of the Mongol Empire, or if it was merely a symptom of the empire's inherent weaknesses and eventual political fracturing. Regardless, the great engine of imperial communication slowly ground to a halt. You can envision the Agons gradually falling into disrepair, fewer horses grazing in their pastures, and the once constant stream of riders dwindling to a trickle. The echoes of galloping hooves grew fainter, replaced by the silence of the vast, indifferent steppe. The incredible age of rapid continent-spanning communication was drawing to a close, at least for a very long time. Though the Mongol Yam eventually faded into history, its colossal achievement leaves a fascinating and often overlooked legacy in the dust. We've journeyed through its remarkable efficiency, its surprisingly comfortable waypoints, and its immense impact on communication, but what remains of this forgotten marvel? The most profound legacy isn't in physical ruins, though faint traces of old Yam routes and station locations can still be found by archaeologists. Instead, its true impact lies in the conceptual blueprint it provided. The Mongols, perhaps unintentionally, demonstrated to the world the immense strategic value of a centralized, state-controlled, and highly efficient communication network. They proved that vast distances could be compressed, and that information could be a weapon, a tool of governance, and an engine of economic activity. This fundamental understanding would eventually inspire other empires and nations, leading to the development of postal systems that would finally catch up, and then surpass the speed of the horse. Think of it, the idea that a message from a capital could reach a distant frontier in days, not months, was a radical notion, almost science fiction for its time. The Yam made that fiction a reality, forced people to think differently about how information moved and how an empire could truly operate as a cohesive unit. Even today, the principles of relay systems, standardized routes, and the prioritization of urgent messages are embedded in our modern logistics and communication networks, from express couriers to fiber optic cables. The yam was the distant ancestor, the primordial soup from which later, more technologically advanced systems would evolve. A quirky tidbit: some academics theorize that the Mongol yam inadvertently contributed to the spread of certain diseases, including the Black Death, by facilitating the rapid movement of people and their associated pathogens across vast distances. While a sobering thought, it underscores the profound interconnectedness the yam created across Eurasia. Historians still argue whether the yam was primarily a product of Mongol military genius or an inevitable evolution of nomadic logistical practices. But its place as a pivotal moment in the history of communication is undeniable. As you drift, now you can almost see a faint shimmer on the horizon of the vast steppe, not of mirage, but of history. It's the ghost of 1,000 galloping horses, carrying invisible messages, connecting an empire, and quietly, patiently shaping the future of how humanity would communicate across the globe. The story of the Mongol Postal System is not just about the past. It's about the enduring human need to connect, to send, and to receive across any distance, no matter how vast. The vast plains of history now recede, carrying with them the last echoes of the galloping horses and the urgent whispers of the Mongol yam. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in soft fading hues. As the winds that once carried the Khan's decrees now gently rustle the grass, a lullaby to the ancient world. You are no longer a weary rider, but a silent observer, watching the dust settle on centuries of incredible innovation. Let the quiet hum of your fan, or the soft stillness of your room, guide your thoughts away from the thundering hooves and into the calm stillness of night. Allow the lingering images of hardy yurts, swift steeds, and the endless silent expanse to dissolve, carrying with them any lingering thoughts of the day. Your journey through the boring yet utterly fascinating history of the Mongol Postal System is complete. May your mind find peace, your body ease, and your dreams be as vast and serene as the steppes themselves.